Right. So this year we are going. We are joining organizations around the world to celebrate the Global Accessibility and Awareness Day. So we did our bit in the UK, and this is not possible without the community. So it's just not. It's not just me organizing this bit. I have a pool of people, volunteers, friends, to help gather ideas and communicate with people internationally and bring and make this happen. So thank you very much for all the volunteers, especially Kath Moon and Veronika Jermolina. That helps. So today we're going to have two talks and one discussion. So pretty standard kind of format, but then the discussion is not about how do we do accessibility, but it's something about sharing inspiring stories. So we're going to use hashtag UXPA UK and GAAP as well, but the main hashtag will be UXPA UK because everyone is using GAAP, so I don't want just to avoid random question coming in. And let's enjoy the evening and give a damn about accessibility. Special mention to the Mensa guys over there. Without their sponsors today, this is not going to happen. We usually have pretty low turnout, and we need some funding to be able to make this happen. So thank you very much to Mensa for sponsoring the event. And Mensa is the only organisation in the UK which has a full membership in the W3C, and also they have members in the committee as well, shaping standards and legislation for the internet. So if you have any questions around this, please do speak to them. And also a special thanks to Sapien Metro for sponsoring, for hosting the event, and also all speakers, volunteers, committee members, and every one of you. So next, I'd just like to pass on the stage to Fabien Marry from Tiger Spike. So he used to be, he's a user experience architect, and then he's going to talk to you about accessibility and iOS. So I'm just going to pass that to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to switch the slide in a sec. And there we go. Right, good evening everybody. I'm going to talk to you about how to go beyond the touchscreen for better accessibility on mobile and tablet native applications. So it's not going to be about the web like you've hearing most of the time. It's more going to be about native apps. So what we're going to talk about today is, first I'm going to start with a bit of an introduction, what it is and why should we care about it. Then I'm going to explain why mobile devices are really a godsend for accessibility, see what we can do to start doing something about it, how we could go the extra mile, and a personal message toward the end. So what it is, then when we're talking about universal access to accessibility, well, it's really, actually, it's not about technology, it's about people mostly. So I'd like you to meet Noelle. Noelle is my grandmother. She's 95. She's in incredibly good shape. She loves to get postcards when we go on holiday, so I've written one for her every time I went anywhere for as long as I can remember. Probably before I could write, I was just putting a cross on my parents' postcard. But lately with her age, her sight is not as good as it used to be, and she has really trouble to read. So what do? Well, I still write a postcard, but I just try to write a lot larger, which is fine because I never say anything informative apart from the place I've been. So it's just a gesture to say I'm thinking about her from wherever I am. So that's just an example. Being inclusive is easy. You just have to care. But of course, it's not just about 95-year-old grandmother. This graph is showing basically, or well, you can see depending on your age. We will start pretty much on here. You probably know that it gets worse with age, but it actually gets a lot worse quite quickly. This is something you need to keep in mind, as a lot of the design those days are done by startups of 20 or 30-year-old designers, and they're some are there and say, no, that text is fine, that contrast is fine, but actually it may not be. But it's not only about sight either. There's a lot of different impairment that you want to consider. So I'm not going to go in detail with all those stats, but you get 63 million UK population, you get 2 million visual impairment. People with arthritis can be an issue when you need to do hand gesture quite precise. 8% of men are colorblind, so that's also relevant. And why should you care about the fact that all those people have those impairment? Well, out of the people who have never used the internet in the UK, 53% have a disability. So there's a very strong link here between having a disability and not being able to join in the rest of the online life as everybody else is, because technology is just not enough user-friendly for them. And why should you care apart from trying to address that gap? Well, if you're in the business, you're trying to sell as much product as you can, and it turns out that people who have less than full ability, whatever that's defined to mean, is actually quite a big number, maybe half of the adult population. So you don't want to ignore that market, especially because around the retirement age, people have a lot of time and they actually have, reasonable amount of disposable income. So you want to make sure you target that audience. And as you know, if you follow demographic, in most developed country, that's Japan, which is quite an extreme case, the ratio between young people and older people is inverting, and pretty soon in Japan you're going to have a lot more people over 60 than younger. So it's something you want to care about. Having an accessible app, by the end of the talk I guarantee you I'll be able to say accessibility. Anyway, it's a big PR opportunity for your client. You can say your product is now accessible to vision impaired people for the first time. It can be a real differentiator among product. And it can be a real change as well. At Tiger Spike we work a lot with newspaper, and in newspaper, for example, we do the iPad app for the Daily Telegraph. You can't really make the font larger on the paper, but you can on an app. So that for the first time, having an app where you can increase the font size is something that allows them to reach a new audience. And another reason why you should care is that it's a legal requirement. It's not actually a choice for a lot of the products you do, especially for government and enterprise. The Disability Discrimination Act of 1995 gives people with disability important right not to be discriminated against, and you need to show that you've taken reasonable effort to make your app accessible. That's just to set the stage a bit, but you may have known about that because those issues have never been are not new. But mobile devices are changing a lot of things, and a lot of the way you can think about accessibility. This used to be your typical dedicated accessibility device. This one is about augmentative and alternative communication. It's not well designed, it looks awful, it's clunky, it can't really do much, it do one thing, and the poor design leads to stigma. When you see someone with that, you can say, oh, that person needs something special. That's already set them apart. And on top of that, it's bloody expensive. 8,000 quid for something like that. So that was yesterday accessibility devices. Today's accessibility device look a lot more like that. Accessibility features are not built in mainstream devices. That means the device is cheaper, better design, better build quality, more feature, and there's no stigma because that's the device everybody is. So I'm going to mostly focus on iOS because this is the platform that is more advanced in terms of accessibility feature out of the box. Android does some of that and Windows does some of that, and a lot of I'm going to say also apply to those guys, but iOS is quite ahead for that. And it's a game changer because, as Stevie Wonder say, there's nothing on the iPhone or the iPad you can do that I can't. So that's completely erasing that border of technology as a barrier between people with impairment and having an online life. Now we're going to take a look at what is built in iOS. So what am I actually talking about when I say accessibility is built in? Some of the things are pretty basic. So all of those things you can enable in any iOS device in the setting. They're already there. You don't have to pay anything. They're already there. Switch them off in the setting and then you can access them anytime. Zoom is a simple feature. It just magnifies a bit of your screen, but it's also a bit clunky. You need to move around to see the different bits. It's great when nothing else is working. You have a high contrast mode where you can see things a bit better if you need to. And they also started addressing people with mobility impairment. A lot of those gestures are nice and great, but if you can't really move your hand that precisely, sometimes that could be a barrier. So they've introduced assistive touch, which is a software interface with a simple touch. It adds a cursor that's always on. When you tap it, you get that kind of menu, and it allows you to control, for example, shaking your phone. It's something you may not be able to do, while you can with that kind of menu, simply with touches. You can also simulate like 4-finger swipe. You set it to 4, and then you do a simple 1-finger swipe, and it's going to pretend, the rest of everything in the OS is going to pretend like you got a 4-finger swipe. Another thing is auditory impairment. On phone you can set different ringtones to different people to know which one is calling you and decide whether you want to pick up or not. Well, if you can hear, obviously that's not going to get you anywhere. What they've done now is you can set a different vibration pattern to different colors. And there's a few presets, And there also you can even make up your own rhythm so you know exactly who's calling. That's one of the features that can actually also be useful even if you can hear. Let's say you're in a meeting and you don't want to be picking up any call except this call from this person that you're expecting. Well, you can make that so that even just by the vibration you can know if that's the person you're expecting or not. Another thing is a large text mode. Pretty simple, you know, nothing revolutionary over there. You go into the settings and set default size to be as big as you want it. That's going to be obeyed by a few first-party apps from Apple. So mail, calendar, contacts, messages, and notes. Doesn't change the UI fonts, but it changes the main body to the font size you've decided. Unfortunately, at the moment, at least in iOS 6, you can't access that setting if you're making a third-party application. If you're making your third-party app, you can't actually ask the system, tell me if that guy put the font larger and I'll do it myself. You can't do that, you have to redo it, but maybe in the future. Interestingly, Safari is an app that doesn't actually use that. So even if you set your font to be pretty big, you're going to still see it zoomed out like you always do. And something that you might find surprising if you use to desktop browser is there's no button to make the font bigger. So if you're just designing your page, say, oh, I don't care about the font size. If people need to, they're just going to press the button to make the font bigger. Well, there isn't on iOS. What you can do is pinch to zoom, which kind of go back to the same zoom issue we had. You see as big as you want, but you need to move around. It's not great for reading. So for long bits of text, there's a button over here, a feature called Reader. What it does is that it strips out the page from everything else but the longer block of text and tries to redo the layout in a way that's easier to read. And even if sometimes it does a bit clunky stuff, but at least it's easier to read. And this mode does have a large font button. So you can just make it as large as you want it and still be able to read it. And I'm going to move on to the next bit, which is VoiceOver. So VoiceOver is the main technology for accessibility in iOS. I'm going to try to do a live demo, so please wish me luck, because that never ever works. So I'm going to pop up my iPad and try to stream to the screen.
You've got 2 volunteers here that can help if you need it.
There we go. So now I'm going to switch on VoiceOver. I also need to plug in the sound. Yep. My shot a bit first time.
VoiceOver on.
Alright, so you can see already what it does. What it does is that it's bringing a cursor on the screen. Well, you can't actually see it, sorry. What happened there?
Alert. Accessibility options. Accessibility on. Selected. VoiceOver button.
Sorry, it now moved on to my other screen.
Oh yeah?
There we are. Not move. Stay there.
No. Inexplicable.
Okay.
It's messing with the airplane.
So if I plug the sound, it's not happy.
You can turn on airplane mirroring after you plug the sound back in.
Okay, I'll try that.
App switcher. Mail. Doubled alert. Accessibility options. Cancel. But. Calendar. Thursday 09 mail. Apps with contact mail. Muted.
So what?
Calendar. Thursday 09 mail.
That's all right.
Double tap to open.
What VoiceOver does is that it reads out loud the first thing you tap. So if you tap
Contacts.
this, instead of just
Double
opening
tap
the
to
app as you would normally, it reads it and also reads a helper text a bit later on. So you can pretty quickly, even if you don't see anything,
Calendar.
move
Photos,
around and see
Facebook. 1. Calendar.
what you can
Thursday
do.
09 May.
So I'm going to try to show you
Double
how
tap to
someone can read email without actually seeing anything on the screen. And to make that a real demo, I'm going to do
Suite row 1, column
Yes.
1, page 1 of 3.
So
Top
now-
left corner, thumbnail width. Screen curtain off.
Sorry.
Doc, mail. Selected, mail, inbox. Screen curtain off.
So you enter into that mode where it goes black, and that's the best way to do QA if you want to make sure that this actually works and you're not cheating by actually looking at the button. I don't see anything.
Chatbox. Search selected. WWF campaigners.
So, and you can-
Quora weekly digest.
you can move your
Why is
finger
human
and
fry
you
such
hear
a big deal?
which
Quora.
email it is.
Yes, selected. WWF campaigners.
And then you double
Quora.
tap to open
Why
that
is human
email.
fry such a big deal? Quora.
That's just the Quora newsletter that I get for some reason while asking this question.
Reply button.
And you can touch your finger on the screen,
Delete button.
and you can hear, see, I'm putting my finger over the delete button or over the reply
Reply
button. And if I double tap that, I'll be able to enter that mode and start replying. So you don't actually need to see the screen to be able to use an iOS app. So that was a bit of a demo. And now we're going back, hopefully, to something that works a bit better. So the big thing about VoiceOver is that it's not just what the name say. It's not just about the voice that it says. It's actually a gateway to access a lot of other things in terms of accessibility for iOS. And we're going to get back to that in a minute. So now I'd like you to meet Andy. Andy is your average 20-something blog. He likes to do email, Twitter, Facebook, just like everybody. He went on holiday, and while diving in the pool, he had a big bit of bad luck, and he hit a rock. So he hurt himself really, really bad, and he's now paralyzed from the neck down. So what that means, that his life completely changed from one day to the next. And we're not talking about someone who's kind of, always been like that and never experienced otherwise. Someone that was used to do everything independently, and suddenly from one day to the next, he can't read an email. He can't text. If he gets a text from his girlfriend, he needs to get somebody else to get the phone, see the text, and read it for him. So immediately he lost a lot of privacy and independence. Well, the good news is that technology is actually catching up and is now using something called iPortal, which is a solution that hooks his chin joystick into the phone. And remember that cursor that we could see in the voiceover? Well, that cursor is a big thing because it means you can control that focus with any kind of input that you want. So he's using it with a chin joystick. Some other wheelchairs have been adapted so people who can move their head have different headsets where pressing this one go left, pressing this one go right, and the middle selects. So they can navigate a full app or the full OS just with limited gesture like that. And there's even a bit more funky projects going on trying to plug into that system any kind of control where you can basically say left, right, top, left, select the old remote or joypad. Well, you'll be able to control your app. It's not just input, it's also output. VoiceOver can read text, but it doesn't need to speak. It can also output it as a Braille keyboard, and you can also input it with that special kind of keyboard. Some other accessibility technology is a lot lower tech. This one is a simple stylus that if you can't really move most of your body but can move your head, you grab that in your mouth and you can press at the button. Low tech, but kind of do the job, but you need to be careful how you design your app. The future is clear. It's not going to be touchscreen, it's going to be voice recognition, especially now that we have digital assistant that can understand natural languages. So you don't need to do precise command. You just say, remind me to buy milk when I get off my bus. And Siri is going to get that, and Google now is doing something similar. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's still limited to what Apple or Google is shipping inside the box. You can't really, as a third-party app developer, hook into it. Maybe that will come, but at the moment it's not there. And at the moment it does a few things very well, but for a lot of other things, that you can't use that. So changing life and making your app accessible with the technology is possible. It's built in, people don't need to buy anything, but you do need to make sure your app works with those accessibility systems. So how do you do that? Well, if you're someone like me who works in a company who basically builds software for clients, that involves everybody on your staff. That's going to start from the sales because they need to sell it to the client. It's a special benefit. It can put us ahead of somebody else going to build the app and not even think about that. Scoping need to know because there's a tiny bit more effort in terms of design and development. UX definitely needs to know because you don't only do your wireframe, but you need to think about what would be the UI if people don't see the screen at all. Suddenly, all the assumption that all your UX was about making a screen and displaying elements on the screen disappears because some users are not going to use the screen at all. And then, of course, UI need to care because some users will use the screen but might need special attention, make sure they can read things and so on. Development and QA, we'll get to it in a minute. So the first thing you should really do, and honestly there's no excuse whatsoever for developers who don't do that, because it's that easy. If you're familiar with a bit of accessibility on the web, you know sometimes you're supposed to add an alt text into images to a text description of something that's only visual. Well, in iOS you can do that with anything you want, really. But the first thing you need to do is decide on your screen what are the elements that need to be seen by VoiceOver. If you want it to be listed by VoiceOver, you just need to tick that box. If you want it to be ignored because it's not actually useful, just uncheck that box. Then you put a label in it, can be whatever text you want, but it should be a short spoken text that's going to be spoken immediately after I focus. So 1 or 2 words, very quickly, because people are going to read a lot of those. And if you want, and if you need to, you can add a hint, which is going to be spoken just after a small break. So it's going to speak the label, breathe a bit, and then start speaking the hint, and then it's going to speak the thread. The thread is basically telling the system and the user what kind of thing is that. Is that a button? Is that an image? Is that a link? Is this the one that's selected? All those kind of threads you can add, and they kind of tweak the behavior of that. So you can do that in the interface builder software, part of Xcode, or you can do that programmatically, purely with code. But it's that easy to do, and you control a lot of things. It's also needed for automated testing. So when you make a native app, it's quite often a very large effort, and tweaking a few things here and there can have big consequences on something you did not expect. So at TigerSpark, we do a lot of massive apps that have been building and building over the years. And when we add new stuff, we want to make sure we don't break something else. So the old way of doing that is having someone, we have a list of tests of things to do, and click there, know that, and repeat the process. And it's very, very painstaking. So now we're doing automated testing. And my developer was telling me, we're doing automated testing with Cucumber. In my head, I kind of Googled that, and that's what I found. Sadly, it's not the way we test ads. That would be so cool, but it's not. So Cucumber is actually a scripting language that kind of sounds like that. So basically, it's some kind of English where you can control a software that's called Calabash that's going to press all those buttons on the screen for you. And you tell him, like, if I'm on that screen, I should see that button, but I should not see that button. And then if I press like those 5-star and then I press rate, then this thing should be rated 5, or whatever test you're going to type into it. And then you can just run all those tests automatically. Anytime you've made a build and you made a change, press the button, it's going to run all of that, and when you come back from your coffee, you're going to see which thing worked and which thing didn't, and you'll be able to focus on that. To be able to do that, and the reason I'm talking about it today, is you see all those things in green. Well, they're the accessibility metadata that I've been talking to you about in the previous screen. So just by putting the accessibility metadata, you can also help your development process. This metadata is really important. It's not something that the developer should just rush at the last minute because he's the one who's doing the code, so he should just type in something there just to say you have something. It's part of your app. Just like anything else that's displayed on the screen, you should pay a lot of attention about what you say, whether it's clear, whether it's on brand, whether it's the right tone of voice. So I think it really should be done at the UX stage by the guy who's designing the app. That is a standard wireframe. Look like most of the wireframe you've seen, I'm sure. What you can do here, because you need to communicate to the developer what kind of accessibility data you want to see, so you can just put that in your annotation, just like we described what happened when you tap, what happened when you double tap. You can just say, well, accessibility, enable that bit, label should be that, hint, which is a longer one, should be that. And that's the way the developer can get this data. Now we're going to move to stage 2. Once you've done all your metadata, you've covered all the bases. You made your app somewhat usable. You can plug into the accelerator. So there's a few standard gestures that are automatically enabled when you switch on VoiceOver that people using VoiceOver will be familiar with. The first one is escape. So it's a simple gesture you do when you get stuck and you want to get back. So that's a 2-finger Z, basically. You can do it, just like that, or more like a scrub. And what it's going to do is it's going to go up, back, close, or cancel. So if you have a modal window, it's going to close it. If you were somewhere in navigation, it's just going to go one level up. So the good news, if you're using Apple Standard Control, you don't need to worry at all about any of that because Apple has made it for you. So it's already going to work. But if you're overriding those controls and making up your own, you want to plug into that to make sure it's easy to use. Second standard gesture is the magic tap, so 2-finger double tap. What it does is the most likely action. Up to you to define what that is in your app. By default, if you don't hook into it, it's going to play pause the music from the iPod app. But if you're in the phone app, it's going to initiate a call or end a call. If you're in the camera app, it's going to take a picture. So basically, the thing that most people will do most of the time in your app, you don't want them to have to hand for the button. Just do that double tap, and they should work. How do you do that? Well, you do need the developers to do something, but it's very, very little. Basically, in their class about that control, they just need to say, well, that's in accessibility perform escape. Well, you should do that. You don't need to do a lot of line of code, because most of the time it's going to be, call whatever you were doing when people were pressing the back button. And just by doing that, you'll plug into that system. And same thing for the magic tap. So you've done all that. What's the next step? And I've tried to arrange them in a way that's from easy to harder to implement in an app, especially when the app is already existing. The next step can be a bit larger, but if you're at the origin of your app, something you can do a bit more easily. Make your font size adjustable. It's that simple. It's not rocket science, but if you just can't read the text, make a way for people to increase the text size, and that'd be a lot better. Something you need to keep in mind as well, because Apple has been really nice with the iPad Mini, where they're saying, "Oh, don't redesign anything, don't code anything else. We're just going to display whatever you're displaying on the big iPad on the small iPad." That's great for developers. That's great for designer. We don't need to redo it. But if your font size was already borderline hard to read on the big Retina display iPad with a very sharp screen, Apple is going to try to display the exact same thing, 20% smaller and blurrier. So if we're already limit borderline can be read on the big one, it's going to be terrible for the small one. So the best solution is to make an option for people to change the font size, or if you can't, make it a bit too big on the big iPad so it's not too small on the small iPad. It's a bit of a hack, but it works with a limited amount of efforts. Something else you shouldn't do is use color only to avoid meaning. So that was a chat where I was using the depth color to tell you if your contacts were away or online. If you call them blind, that kind of look like that, can't really tell them apart, so you want to use shape instead for that. And that doesn't need to be your default option that everybody's going to see. That can just be a preference that people who need it going to enable it. That's going to make a lot of difference. And then, might seem obvious, but it's not. You want to avoid gesture-only interaction. So that's something quite interesting as people were trying to see what you can do with smartphone and the beauty of the multi-touch touchscreen that can do complex gesture and so on. The guy being clear at this to-do list that a lot of people love, but there's no button, basically. There's no crow whatsoever. You need to do gestures to do anything. I'm not using it myself because I've never managed to learn and remember all those intuitive commands. Well, that's the first screen they show as part of the tutorial. So if you want to create a new list, a new item, you just pinch 2 rows apart. But you don't have any button that could be read by VoiceOver. There's no touch target. Everything is gesture-based. So if people can't see the screen or can't do the gesture, they just won't be able to use your app. So if you're doing that, be aware, it's not never do it, but if you're doing it, be aware that you're shutting off a lot of users. How can you check your accessibility? Well, simple. 50 shades of something. Test your graphic with color blindness simulator. There's Photoshop options for that. There's full OS thing that's gonna hide your colors. You'll see if that does something. No peeking. You can conduct quality assurance using VoiceOver with the screen off. If people can use your app without cheating, well, you've done something good. And if you have the time and the money, of course, the best thing is the real thing, as in include user with impairment in usability testing. That's much better because they're more familiar than you with those systems because they probably use it every day, and they'll be able to tell you firsthand if they can do everything or not. So I like to almost close with what can you do when you do a bit more than the minimum. And I like this quote because it's so true. This is a camera app in iOS. It's on purpose very simple, not that many options. A big button to take a picture, and again, if you do double tap anywhere, you take a picture. But we have an extremely massive amount of computing powers in our pocket all the time with us, so you can do a lot more than just take a picture. on iOS, it does, and a lot of other cameras now, it does face recognition to focus automatically when there is a face. But the guy who did the app were thinking a bit further. Well, since we're doing face recognition for focus anyway, why don't we plug that into VoiceOver? So you don't actually need to tap anything when you got VoiceOver on. It's going to speak to you. One face, small face near the right edge, autofocused. And that's awesome, because they were really thinking beyond the box. That allowed blind people to take picture. So if you're like me, when the first time I read that line, I said, that doesn't make much sense. Why would you want to take a picture if you can't see it? Well, just because you're blind doesn't mean everybody else around you is blind. Your parents may not be blind, and I'm sure they would want to see the picture of the newborn. So that kind of feature, it's not that hard to do, but it can make a real difference. There's a lot of apps on iOS that are dedicated to help, especially people who need a bit more. One of them is Aradni GPS. It's a GPS app for people who can't really see, and to help them explore cities or forests. That's crazy talk, and it apparently works. So that's an example of things you can do where you may not have thought about it. The next one is TapTapSee. It's an app that sees what you have on your screen. You take a picture and it tells you what's in it. And for example, if I have a can of Coke and a can of Pepsi, it's going to tell me the left one is a Coke, you don't want a Pepsi. Oh, that's trivial, of course, but it can also do the same thing for medication. It can do the same thing for bills. It can do the same thing for credit cards, and so on. It works really, really well. It works so well, I'm actually convinced it's sending the data to someone somewhere, typing it.
It's crowdsourced.
It's crowdsourced.
Yes.
So that's pretty impressive. I've been using it everywhere, tagging everything from my wife to my iPhone to my toys. And
It's great.
Young woman in red shirt.
So what did you say? What did this gentleman say? It's what source?
Crowdsourced.
Crowdsourced.
So it's sent to people. It's not a machine that tells you. It's sent to someone who can see and going to type back what it was on the picture. Another example of going beyond what you can do minimally is Instapaper. Instapaper is an app that you can save text to read later, and since they already had the code and the interface to switch fonts for your preferences, well, they had this quick thinking of adding a font that's specially designed for people with dyslexia, and it's supposed to help them recognize the character better and help them read. Wasn't a big effort for them, but that can make a big difference for them. Those were just a few examples of things where you can go beyond the line. I'd just like to close with a bit of a video message that really sums up what it's all about. One more.
I've been lucky. I'm sitting here in a chair that very few people have, talking to you with a voice. It's not my own, but I'm talking. For me, technology has been life-changing. And yet I dream that all people with disabilities should be seen for who they are, not the machines they use. So I ask that you create with everyone in mind, consider every need, and go beyond perceived limits. From a challenge, the brilliant can become even better. Those who can, join together and create technology for everybody.
There was just a comment from the deaf person. It's a little bit ironic there were no subtitles.
Yes, there probably are on the website, but to be honest, I probably didn't think about that. I'm pretty sure if you go to YouTube and see that video, you can switch on subtitles.
I'm just teasing. It's all right.
Anyhow, so that was it, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we only have time for 2 short questions. Questions, anyone?
This might not necessarily be relevant for iOS, but where do you think software like eye tracking or Google Glass is going to go when it comes to accessibility? Because obviously voice is the most obvious, but actually using your eyes, there's a lot of progress in that area. What do you think about that?
Yeah, eye tracking is getting really cheap now because all the research be done around Kinect and that kind of stuff. Kinect is more motion, but it is getting cheap. So they can tell basically where you're looking and where you're selecting. You kind of need to train people to use that because you don't want it to be like, I think Samsung was about to release something where if you they've actually released that one. If you look away from your video, it's going to pause it. It's assuming that just because you're looking at somebody else working through, you want to pause your video, which is not that obvious at a connection. So eye tracking, maybe, but it depends on the context. If you're using a mobile device, you need to be really still and have it like that. But yeah, it could do a lot. And a Google Glass, I don't know. It'd be curious to see.
It's interesting because I just came back from Google Ability Night event at Google. So Robin Christopherson from Ability Night was talking about the power of Google Glass, because for blind people with having Google Glass with the screen reader now, the Google Glass can see for you. For people with dyslexia, with any other impairments, they can read emotions, they can tell you what's around the environment. Also, in the community, people are talking about Internet of Things. Sensors are cheap now, so you can know what's around you, the speed, change of temperature, change of the lights and stuff. So that gives you information about your environment and helps you, do things better.
Exciting.
Cool. Any more questions?
How reliant are you on people like Apple and Google to provide such services, or are there like other bodies who they work with or encourage them to actually implement stuff like this?
If you're on iOS, the philosophy of iOS is Apple do what they want. If you're not happy with that, you're welcome to buy something else. So the good thing is they're pretty good at doing it themselves, so it's built in. On Android, because iOS you won't be able to, for example, add your own screen reader or your own keyboard if Apple doesn't allow that kind of cross-app thing. Android does, and there are many screen readers built in, but they all work differently. You don't really want like 5 screen readers with different gestures that people will need to learn. Android is now shipping something called TalkBack, which used to be a third-party app, which is now in ice cream sandwich on all the Android devices as well. So yeah, Apple is more closed. I don't know how much outreach they do to get to the top of it, but they're pretty good at what they do, and they keep pushing it. And you can write to them.
Yeah, maybe the government needs to get involved.
People at ISO are coming up with new standards. Things around personalization, common language between technology. Also, people at W3C, a lot of legislation standards, and also I think accessibility is something not something that we can push to one level to say, only government can do that. I think it's everyone's responsibility. You do your bit, and then when they stitch up, it's a beautiful solution. Cool. One more last question.
Obviously, a lot of the talk focused on visual impairment. Have you got any metrics on how improving this area actually impacts on other users in terms of improvements for dyslexic users or those who have, especially with the aging population, cognitive changes like impairment or as your age having slower cognitive responses?
Not really, to be honest. There are some efforts done that way. For example, in the latest OS, you have something called forgot the name, but basically it forces you inside one app, and you can disable everything else, and you can even disable specific area of the screen if you don't want people to get out of the app and be completely lost. So it kind of allow you to set up an app that can be specially designed for people with that kind of need, and without leaving them a way to get out and get lost in the rest of the system. It's not an area where a lot of efforts have been done so far, I think. On iOS and on everything, it's mostly going to be third-party apps. They're going to see a market for that. They're going to do a special app dedicated to that.
Okay, so thank you very much, Fabien, for your talk. So next up we have Alistair Duggan from BBC. So he's going to talk about talk is going to be about case study from BBC Olympic website. Sorry about development. So Alistair is the lead developer at the BBC, and he's been involved in developing all the iOS and websites during the for Olympic 2012.
Accessibility. Sorry, I was trying to get this to.
Cool.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm not quite the lead developer at that whole of BBC. It's quite big, but I was the lead front-end developer on the Sport Olympic website. So in this talk, I was going to give a little bit of context about the Olympics project, chat about some of the challenges. Because in the past, I've done this talk with one of the accessibility specialists at the BBC, and she tends to talk about the challenges from her point of view, and she also talks about the mobile and the video part of the Olympics. I'm just going to chat about the desktop and the tablet, because that's the bit that I kind of concentrated on, and I'll also cover some of the lessons learned at the end. The Olympics was probably the most ambitious digital project at the BBC so far. It was the first truly digital Olympics, and the whole idea was that people wouldn't miss a moment if they didn't want to. The ambition was that what the coronation did for TV in 1953, the Olympics would do for digital in 2012. So kind of really pushing the technology and kind of bringing the nation together. So the sports website was built around the sports domain. So if you think about the Olympics, you've got athletes, you've got countries, you've got events, you've got venues, you've got sports. Basically, we built a page for every one of these domain items. So we had 10,000 athlete pages, 205 country pages, 36 sports pages, 24 medal-winning event pages, and 30 venues, and they were all interlinked. So if you were on an athlete page, you could get to the team that they were in, you could get to the events that they were on, and if you went to the event page, you could get to the venue and all that sort of stuff. Each of those pages was a aggregation page for BBC content. So we had components related to news or to video, or to results or to schedules, medals and facts and figures and that kind of thing. In total, I think we made about 120 different components, and the idea was to make it as rich an experience as possible. So on the left here we have like a Top Trump style country comparison module. In the middle there we've got a Twitter module that was placed so some of the Team GB athletes were tweeting through the games, and that was on the BBC website. On the right there we have a promo to link to the live video for a session that was happening, and a carousel that shows medalists that are doing well in Team GB. As well as all of those pages, obviously there was an index page for the countries, for the athletes, for the venues, for the sports. Each sport had a list of events. We had a schedule and results section, which allowed people to really kind of drill in and find the sessions that they were interested in. There was two views. There was a grid view that was kind of easy to scan. There was a list view that was more text-based, potentially more accessible. And yeah, just let you drill in and find exactly what event you were interested in multiple ways. We also had the medal table, so we had there were medals by country, there were medals by sport, there were medals by athletes, and all of these were updated dynamically in real time. On top of this, there was the interactive video player, so you could kind of watch the live video or catch up. There was a page for every heat of every event. And on top of that, there was all of the sports news pages where the journalists could write stories, post clips, have video galleries, and have live commentaries on events. So those screenshots that I've shown you, they were from the desktop site. Most of this was also available on the mobile site, and also on connected TV you could get on video and the pedals. So there was tens of thousands of pages, literally, possibly more. So we all knew that this was going to be a popular website, but I don't think we kind of expected it to go down quite as well as it did. So we had 37 billion UK browsers, which equated to 66% of the UK online adult population, 57 million global browsers, and 111 billion video requests in total across all platforms. So the challenges. So a huge amount of effort was put into making this work cross-platform. So as part of the desktop team, one of our real priorities was to make it accessible to everybody, irrespective of their ability or the device that they were using. That becomes quite challenging when you've got such a big project, especially when it's got an immovable deadline, where the event only lasts for 17 days, because it kind of means that you have to get it right at the start. There's not much flexibility for improving it a bit later on. Also, we knew there was going to be a huge audience, and it was going to be quite high profile, so if we did get things wrong, people would be quite vocal about it. To make things worse, lots of the pages were kind of updating with real data in real time, which kind of means that potentially you don't know what a page is going to look like until you kind of start getting the data through. On top of that, the design and the development team weren't necessarily very close together, so there was a big design team that kind of spent a long time coming up with these really ambitious ideas, creating Photoshop documents, and they were kind of handed over to the development team. They've been really ambitious with JavaScript, trying to make lots of usability kind of enhancements and make things really rich and engaging, all of which makes things kind of harder to make accessible. On top of that, you've got multiple teams throughout the BBC and external, and a really mixed knowledge of accessibility on those teams, so you can have a desire to make something accessible, but if people don't know how to do it, then it becomes slightly more challenging. So, the desktop. So what was our approach? So the main thing was to build with accessibility in mind from the start. There's kind of, you don't want to leave the accessibility bit to the end, especially when you've got such a big project and such a tight deadline, because it will take longer if you're trying to add stuff at the end, because effectively you'll be building something twice. Lots of us weren't specialists at the time, but we had some accessibility specialists at the BBC, so it's a case of utilising that knowledge and getting feedback as soon as you can. The earlier that you spot problems, the earlier you can make amends or kind of try to fix them. I'll just hit the wrong button.
Just press play again. Oop.
So something that I made sure that all of the developers had on the various teams was to get good accessibility training, so everybody was trained on screen readers. We also had a Wyaria course. If people don't know what Wyaria is, it's an extension to HTML that basically lets you provide more semantics to kind of interactive components and helps you make JavaScript accessible. Put a lot of effort into making sure that there was a support network, so we kind of would have learning bunches and brown bag sessions where when people had implemented something that they were particularly proud of, they could kind of demo it to help spread that knowledge. Equally, if people were having trouble with making something accessible, you can kind of like have a peer review and get input and suggestions for how to make it more accessible. Something that worked really well, so on projects that I've worked on the past, I've kind of noticed that if you're a developer doing more back-end stuff, you're concentrating on the back-end. If you've got somebody that's trying to do the back-end and the front-end at the same time, they're not going to pay the same sort of attention to the front-end that the front-end needs, and it's in the front-end that you can introduce accessibility barriers most easily. So we made sure that our team, we kind of had the PHP specialist and we had the front-end specialist. The front-end specialist would take care of making the front-end accessible. The PHP specialist could be worrying about unit testing and all the technical stuff that isn't involved in the user experience. Something else that's really helpful is to kind of to brainstorm. There's so many ways to tackle a problem. Get other people involved and kind of have sessions to work out what's best. Something else that worked really well is that we used an agile methodology. So basically, we worked in 2-weekly sprints. You kind of commit to the highest priority backlog items at that time. and you commit to completing them in that sprint. So at the end of that sprint, you should have a working thing of what you've said that you get done. That means that you are testing stuff frequently through the life cycle of a project, rather than waiting to try to integrate it all at the end and then finding stuff's not working. So testing thoroughly was really important to the success of the project. And that was developers testing themselves. It was also getting the accessibility specialists at the BBC to test stuff for us and feedback, and any bugs that we introduced, we would then fix kind of there and then. So some other things that we did was we used a component library and we used progressive enhancement. So I could talk about these for ages, but we probably haven't got time, so I'll keep it brief. But basically, when building websites, rather than thinking about pages, it's much more helpful to think about components. And if you've got a component, it'll quite often be that that's made up of smaller subcomponents. If you can kind of identify those and abstract those out, you not only get reusable code, but you have a more consistent implementation of how you're doing things, which it transfers to a more consistent user experience for people that are interacting with your website. So once we'd abstracted out all those kind of smaller components, we then focused on the bigger components. So we had something called the component library. So basically, it's much quicker to build pages made of components rather than to keep building pages that in fact contain the same bits of functionality. It also means that you can kind of test stuff independently from the real website, so that again works really well. Once we had our components, it was a case of making sure that the page templates that these components were going in were going to be accessible. So making sure that they had a unique H1 and a unique title. So again, one of the success factors was using open standards and progressive enhancement. So the important thing with progressive enhancement is that you are building stuff, you're concentrating on the content first, then kind of the semantics, then the visual layer, and then the kind of the interactive JavaScript layers afterwards. And so here is that if somebody's not got JavaScript, they'll still get something that works. If someone hasn't got JavaScript and CSS, they'll still get content that works. Again, I could go into a huge amount of depth in this, but really important for accessibility to build stuff this way. So the most important thing is when you get a design is to think about what the content of that design is, to put it in your page and make sure that it's in a logical order. Once you've got your content in a logical order, it's then a case of picking the most appropriate HTML element to mark up that content. If your content is going to either be seen visually or read out by a screen reader or going to be felt by a braille device, the devices need to know exactly what is in your page, what is a button, what is a link. If you're not using the right markup, a computer can't kind of can't communicate that to a user. So content and HTML is inherently accessible. It's kind of when you start to add the styles and the interactions that you can start to introduce accessibility barriers. So when you start to write your CSS, kind of make sure that you're not adding any barriers. So some common ones are kind of making sure that that items in your page have a focus state as well as a hover state, because if people are using a keyboard, they need to be able to see where they are when they're interacting with the page. You want to make sure that people can increase the font size if they've got poor vision. You want to check for colour contrast and various things like that. So once you've got something that now has content and looks good, and works, you can now add the icing on the top, like the JavaScript, the carousels, and the kind of enhanced usability. This is probably the easiest layer to add accessibility barriers. You need to check that all content can be accessed using the keyboard. You need to make sure that you don't introduce any keyboard traps. You need to make sure that you're not going to break the experience in an old browser that doesn't understand the JavaScript that you've written. So then once you've got your JavaScript components, they obviously need to be styled. And on top of that, you can then start to add in YARA, which is this extra semantics to describe components that you're using. And also you need to be careful to manage the focus and to implement the keyboard controls and those kinds of things. So we didn't always follow this technique. So an example, here we've got a favourites tray which had personalised information for caching purposes. We couldn't have a non-JavaScript version. That's fine, you have to be pragmatic about these things. The JavaScript version was accessible. If somebody didn't have JavaScript, they just wouldn't have had that functionality. But you have to be pragmatic about these things. So this is an example of the medal table that was one of the main things that I worked on. So originally it was delivered as a Flash prototype for an agency. So as you can see, you've got a list of countries. If you click on a country, it brings in the sports. If you click on a sport, it brings in the events. If you click on the event, it will bring in the athletes. And you can see exactly how many medals have been won and by whom. So again, used open web standards to build this, using HTML and CSS and JavaScript to ensure that it was accessible, using progressive enhancement, and taking real care over the interaction, so that if you're using a keyboard and you select country, when the new content loads in, that you move the focus to the new content, so that you don't have somebody kind of not being able to interact with the new content that is appearing. So in some ways accessibility is not actually that hard, it's just kind of paying attention to all of the small detail. And I guess what makes accessibility hard is, I guess, a lot of people don't know about the small details of what makes something accessible. So I thought I'd show a few things of some of the accessibility problems that we had that we fixed, and then I'll also show you some of the stuff that actually got through as well, just to show that we weren't perfect. We had some colour contrast issues. So some of the colours for the icons, like the Twitter icon and some of the visited link colours, the contrast didn't meet accessibility guidelines. So if you had poor vision, you may not have been able to see what was going on. We had some examples where we were advised that the HTML that we'd use to mark something up was kind of overly complicated. So if a screen reader user was listening to it, they'd be hearing headings inside lists and just all this oral clutter that makes the page harder to get the real kind of content from. So the solution there was just to refactor that to not use the lists but to keep the headings. There's stuff like the global navigation when that was first built. If you increase the font size, when the text enlarged, you'd get overlapping and you wouldn't be able to read what was there. So just took someone a couple of hours to fix that, so that no matter how big you increase the font size, that you could kind of still read everything. Here, this is an example. So on our pages, there was a favourites button, so that you could kind of, if you favorited a page, that would get added to your favourites tray. The developer that originally wrote this used a span, which you can't access a span using a keyboard, because a keyboard. So the solution was to make it a button. It is a button, so use the right element. That fixes it. I had a similar issue with the video clips, because there was a span that was used for the button. It was impossible to play the video with a keyboard, so we fixed that. Probably my favourite bug was So in the fifth module, we had infinite scroll, which is getting quite popular. Looks good, kind of has some usability and benefits, but if you're a keyboard user and you tab inside of there, as you're tabbing through, more content loads at the bottom, so you actually can't ever get out of that because it is an infinite scroll. So the team that built that, we fed that back and they just came up with a solution to make sure that you could get out. So a few things that got through. So on the pedal, because our pedals, there was only communicated by colour. So if you're colourblind, you wouldn't necessarily know if a medal was gold or bronze. Fed that back to design, but they felt that with the constraints of the design, there wasn't anything they could do about that. This was an interesting one where we've got, so these are both country pages. On the left you've got the Team USA page, on the right we've got the Team GB page. The designers wanted the Team GB page to look different, but the way that they did that, we actually had to kind of have different content in different positions, so that could quite easily confuse either a screen reader user or consistency is a good thing. Here's an example. We've got links to some news articles. At the top we've got some text that says more from United States. United States, that's a link, but you kind of can't actually see that unless you hover over it. Quite a common one, the editorial team is using infographics. So here we've got a graphic that shows Usain Bolt's rivals' personal bests, and that's captured in an image. The alt text says Bolt graphic, so the screen reader user wouldn't be able to get any of that kind of information out of that. We had an auto-suggest functionality. As a sighted user, you kind of get to see stuff that you might be searching for. Unfortunately, the jQuery plugin that we were using at the time didn't announce that to screen reader users, so the search box was still usable, but screen reader user wouldn't get the benefit of the auto-suggest. And probably the worst one. So on the event, on the result pages during the event, these would update in real time. So every 10 seconds, the table of results would swap out for a more recent table of results. Which, if you're a screen reader user, again, you would, if you happen to be in that table and the new table came in, you'd kind of get thrown out and you wouldn't know where you were. So the solution would to have some sort of ability to disable the auto refresh. Unfortunately, this is built by an external agency and time constraints, and then that didn't ever get done. So lessons learned. How am I doing for time? Oh, cool. Okay. So accessibility really is a team effort, and everybody on the team kind of plays a really important role, whether it be kind of the user interface architecture, or the graphic design, or the developer, or the content editor. Each one can really easily introduce an accessibility barrier. So it's kind of a joint responsibility, and everybody kind of has to want to make it accessible for it to be accessible. It's really easy to introduce an issue, which is why testing is so important. Like, you can't just assume that something that you've built by your crack team of developers is going to be accessible. Somebody may not have been thinking, may have, really easy to introduce a accessibility barrier. So also, like, collaboration is really important. If you get a designer and a developer and editorial kind of working together at the same time, you're going to come up with a much better user experience than if a designer designs something in a Photoshop document and then kind of hands it over to the developer to then implement. If somebody on that team has accessibility knowledge, then that's great, and if there's not somebody with accessibility knowledge, there are trying to get some accessibility feedback, because it's much better to build it in from the start rather than completing it, launching it, and then finding out that what you've made isn't accessible. Progressive enhancement, really important for accessibility. If you're not using progressive enhancement, if when you build something you're purely thinking about how it looks or how the interaction works, guaranteed you will be introducing some accessibility errors there if you're not thinking about the content and the content first. Test early and often. And the big one was that 100% accessibility is not realistic. It should be your goal, but it's not going to happen. But that's fine. You kind of have to be pragmatic about these things. You just need to realise that if you've not got time to fix everything, you'll need to prioritise, because there'll be some bugs that have much more of an impact than others. So therefore, do the big impact ones first. The other thing that was really interesting from the project was that accessibility doesn't need to compromise design. Kind of sometimes when you start talking about accessibility in meetings, like people sort of go, oh, and there's this kind of general thought that it's going to compromise the aesthetics or the interactions. I think that we proved that you don't. That it in fact makes a better user experience for everybody. It doesn't. Because it's not a compromise. It's a great thing. It's because I like to think of accessibility as being universal usability, trying to make your product work for as many people as possible in as many conditions as possible. Cool. That's my talk. Follow me on Twitter. And I've got a blog which I sometimes write quite detailed articles about accessibility. If you've got any questions,
thank you very much. You kind of exited and then come back.
Oh, didn't I? Oh no, no.
Question. Top of one or two.
Oh no, I'm well over. Sorry.
No problem.
First of all, thank you so much, especially the last point that you said, that accessibility doesn't mean it has to be a shit design.
Yeah.
Because most times when you talk about accessibility, it's down to the fact that the people implementing it don't actually know how to implement accessible sites.
Yeah.
So question number one is the lessons learned and everything that you guys did. Is there a case study out there that can be shared with the wider world? Because this is exactly the brilliant kind of case study that you need for accessibility in the.
So I guess so. Me and Henny, the accessibility specialist, we did this presentation at CSUN, but it lasted an hour and it had the mobile and video stuff. So my slides for that are up on SlideShare. That's kind of as much as we've done. It's not really kind of like you could write a book on it. To be honest, I'd love to, but you've only kind of got so much time.
BBC to sponsor it. And I guess I have a second question. You said in the beginning you had a lot of upfront design, and then you kind of had to build it.
Yeah.
How did you get over that, or did you get the designers in later on? And how did that work?
So it's really important to feedback as soon as you can. So if you spot an issue, like one of the first issues that we saw was none of the forms had submit buttons, because submit buttons can clutter up a design. But you need a submit button, because otherwise your form will won't be accessible if you're using a keyboard. Because if you're relying on JavaScript to submit your form, as soon as someone's using a keyboard and tabbing through something, the form will just submit. So there's just when you saw stuff like that, or colour contrast issues, or just strange interactions, it was just kind of a feedback, and hopefully they could improve it. But as you saw, there was some stuff that got through, and as a developer, you're not very popular if you go in and change the design sort of thing. So but that's why it's a group effort and why everybody has to be on board.
Okay, one more last question.
I was reading last year about the group you did for at least a sort of global experience language.
Yeah.
Did you use that as a platform at your starting point? Was that?
all BBC websites built in the last few years have conformed to gel. So yeah, the designers were using gel to influence the design. Yeah.
We can field one more question.
Yeah, I just want to know, is there any way for you to measure the success of the project at the end of the 7-day period in terms of feedback from users or anything else? That would be really interesting.
Yeah, no, my measure of success is that we didn't get any complaints. So there were a few complaints about videos not being captioned, but when you've got 2,500 hours of live video, that kind of becomes really difficult. So that's what I take. That's what I take from a project, that we didn't get any complaints about stuff. Whereas I work on other projects, and if you've made a boo-boo, you'll find out quite quickly.
Okay. Thank you very much, and round of applause. So next we're gonna have a discussion.
Can you sit again?
How did you sit there? Maybe you can I'll just move this back. And we'll have on the side, maybe.
Yeah. So today we're supposed to have 3 panelists, but unfortunately one couldn't make it. So we have Abdi Gas, and Andre.
Cool. So when Caleb and I sat down first to plan this event, the challenge we had was how to try and inspire people in a very short period of time. Very quickly we realized that we weren't going to talk about accessibility audits. You're done when you understand what I mean. So we thought about the most powerful moments in our accessibility careers. And it was actually meeting someone who perceived the world in a very different in a very different way. So what we've decided to do is to invite these people and to invite you to meet them and to talk to them. So Andre Louis and Abdi Gas are our discussion members today, and also apologies from Paul Carter, who is unfortunately ill. He's sending his apologies. We hope he gets well. Okay, so we'll kick off with introductions. I'm Veronika Jermolina, and I work in user-centered design. I previously worked at AbilityNet, and I try to make sure that every single thing I do is inclusive, and I try to consider the different modalities that both speakers today talked about. So today's discussion is about overcoming barriers. I got braces the day before. If you see my mouth full of metal, it's not because I have tongue-activated clicking device from my iPhone, unfortunately. I've been described as highly disturbing, and also a hipster. Okay, so over to you guys. Abdi, would you like to start off by introducing yourself?
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Abdi. Obviously I'm deaf, you can see, because I use sign language, and I have an interpreter opposite me who's doing my voice for me. A long time ago I was very interested in technology and how to get over the barriers, and I was kind of very linked to computers. It was an easy way for me to go. It was very natural. I linked to technology. And then over time I got my degree in human and computer integration. I finished that and I had my degree, and then I was looking for a job, and I went to different job interviews, and it was very difficult for me, and they were always talking about how are you going to communicate with hearing people. They were always talking about that particular issue, and I felt it was indirect discrimination. And at that time I didn't know that term, because the disabled arena was new to me. It was later when I worked in the disability arena that I learned about my rights and different areas of empowerment for disabled and deaf people. Later I set up my own charity to help deaf people in this particular arena.
Cool. Thanks, Abdi. So how about, I heard that there are 2 cultures, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. The big D culture for deaf people, and also the small d culture. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that?
You're absolutely right. There's a big D and a small d. I think it's a bit bullshit, actually, myself. There's a big D and a little d. Now, the big D means that you're a deaf person who uses British Sign Language. You recognise when discrimination happens. You've got your own language. You've got your own culture. Now, small d means like, oh, I'm a little bit ill, I'm deaf, I need hearing aids. At the moment, my charity aims really to say it doesn't matter whether you're big D or you're little d, we're a community. We don't need to fight over, are we a medical or a social model? We need to stop doing that and come together. And we experience the same barriers, we both want to get over them. Little d people, they use captions, they rely on English, they don't use sign language, and they're very kind of reliant on technology like hearing aids, where a big D person would use a sign language interpreter and use sign language, but we need to come together, really work together as a one community.
Great, thanks very much, Abdi. Andre, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good evening, I'm Andre Louis. I'm totally blind since birth, apparently. I'm a freelance musician, married with 2 wonderful children. Married to a fully sighted person, which was interesting. At the moment, I sell speed dots screen protectors for the iPhone. The first speaker that came on, whose name I have conveniently forgotten, I do apologise, mentioned iOS, and that's the platform that I live and breathe pretty much. Although I'm a PC man at heart, I couldn't really deal with a Mac on a daily basis, it would kill me. Technology has been the be-all and end-all as far as music and my life is concerned since I left school, and actually during school. The first ugly laptop I remember getting from school was a 286 with 20 megs of hard drive space, yippee, 4 megs of RAM, and it was ugly. It was horrible. I remember spending a lot of geography lessons playing Star Trek, but you're supposed to be using WordPerfect, all using speech and no screen at all. I've never had any light. I don't even have light perception. Technology, what does it mean to me? It means being able to tweet, being able to be here today, being able to not use an A to Z but still give the CAD guy directions. It's everything. There's so much it does do and little it can't do with the right people behind it. And that's why I'm here today. One of the reasons anyway.
Did you give instructions to the taxi driver today?
I didn't need to because he had an actual GPS, but I was in the back of the cab once and the cab guy did not look at me. He flapped a an A to Z in my face and said, "Can you read?" So I gave him that look over the back of the seat. I didn't have a working GPS. I was using some antiquated Nokia rubbish. So at the time I had no access to GPS. That was like late 90s. But everything has changed so much now. The iPhone is an absolute game changer in the biggest possible way. That's a lot of what I want to talk about this evening.
Great, okay. Could you tell us about a clever hack or something that you made, something that didn't work for you but then worked for you, and how you managed to tweak it?
Wow.
Where do you start?
That's such a hard question, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I guess getting an iPhone starts that. Virgin Media came out last year in 2012 with an app that made the off-the-shelf TiVo work for us. All it was the TV Anywhere app, which by the way is a very misleading title, but anyway. It does mean, though, that I can delete my wife's Strictly Come Dancing if I want to be sleeping on Strictly Come sofa. Not going to happen, okay? But to say that I took for granted in 2010 when I bought the TiVo that I was the bill payer and I would be able to use hardly any of the functions. It was nice that the engineer came and set up audio description, which is a great service, and showed me the buttons of remote control, of which there are a great many. As you would take for granted that you could use it, I took for granted I would not be able to use it and probably never would. However, when Virgin did come up with their app, I didn't even have to hack it. It worked out of the box. Connected the TiVo to the Ethernet port of my router, bang, I could use it. So now I can add shows, I can delete shows, set up recordings and delete stuff that I'm not supposed to. And it's great, that kind of thing, that kind of accessibility out of the box is second to none, and I'm really glad that they did that. So glad, actually, that I did a podcast on the app from a blind person's perspective, and Virgin Media picked up on it and actually asked me to be on their testing team. So that's a really good step in the right direction for them.
Fantastic. So how does it work? Do you control your TV through the app on your phone?
That's right. I can change channels, set up shows, set up planned recordings, series links, actually change the channel. I have another app on the PC that actually acts as a TV remote. And I was on a train to Birmingham one time, clearly on a train. I made a lot of noise about being on this train to my wife. And she got home, was watching TV. I VPN'd into my network at home, and I was playing with the TV channels, pranking her. I said, well, look, the TV box must be broken. She texted me. And she was very confused. Little things like that. It's an accessible app, and it was great. And the thing is about accessible apps is that when you don't know that you've done it, I give you more thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andre. How about you, Abdi? Have you had to hack something to work for you? Could you tell us about that?
Well, really, there's loads of different apps that I use, but my favourite one is from Deaf People Before. The app that we use, lots of different apps. So when you meet deaf people, the best one, really, the funniest one for me, was back in the days when deaf people didn't have any phones. You had to write notes to each other, and you'd go to the pub or wherever, you'd meet someone, you'd have to take out a pen and paper and write a note to each other. Now it's easy. You can take out your phone and just do the app. You can use different apps to kind of communicate directly. Before, you'd have to write, and then you'd see this nice girl, you'd take out a piece of paper, write something down, she's gone. So now it's much quicker, it's easier. You can just use an app and you've got that direct communication. These kind of apps have really changed our lives, and it's also enabled the deaf community to link with each other. Like, you could meet someone in London, and before you'd arrange to meet them on a Saturday, you wouldn't know, you couldn't communicate, you wouldn't know if they were going to be there. Now it's so different. Now you can arrive, and now as soon as you arrive, you can get like a sorry I'm ill excuse or something. You can be pissed off about it, but you've got that link, you've got a direct link to know exactly what's going on. Before, it's a constant dating game.
Is it something that changed with mobiles?
Oh, absolutely, definitely, really a lot of changes. Now, I can control my charity, I can do my emails through my phone, I can do my timetable, my calendar through my phone, I've got accessibility through my phone, I can do FaceTime through my phone, I can use sign language through my phone. It's fantastic, because some deaf people, English isn't their first language, it can be difficult to understand. Now with FaceTime, you can use, there's Evu, there's the different apps, Evu, there's Skype, and you can just sign directly. You can have 3 deaf people signing to each other, and it's just an amazing thing, really, and it's a big, fantastic change.
Great, thank you. Andre, how about you? I saw you've got a very clever setup. You have a mic attached to your collar. You have...
Oh, you saw those.
You have your iPhone with you in a very clever case. Could you tell us about that?
The case is actually just, it's an extra battery, because I use a lot of data when I'm out. A lot of the time I'm tweeting or using HeyTell. Some of you must know what that is, at least. And FaceTime, actually, when my wife was on holiday and I didn't know what was what in the cupboard, I would FaceTime her and get her to read me the labels. So that's human use of accessibility. That's crowdsourcing, right? It's great. But TapTapSee was mentioned as another app, actually. It's great. And occasionally you find in the fridge milk and orange juice bottles look a little bit similar. I don't want milk on in my tea, and I don't want orange juice on my cereal. It's not good. So you have to kind of use apps like that when you don't have human help to make sure that you don't mess up, because it's actually easy to mess up, especially if you don't want to open it.
I remember when I met you first and I showed you an iPhone 3G. You told me it was an expensive brick. You wouldn't get it for your friends, for your family, for your kids. You would never do that. And now you and your wife have iPhones.
Caught me red-handed.
So what did Apple do for such a great turnaround?
They pulled their finger out of their proverbial backside and sorted it out. VoiceOver is, as was stated earlier, a great tool. And without it, I would be back to some rubbish Nokia probably, because Droid is just not for me. I do remember in the 90s, right, being on a train, texting somebody using infrared, and if the phone moved away from the infrared sensor by just a little bit, no text, goodbye. Because the phone itself wouldn't talk. So I had to use a PC. So that's cumbersome. You've got to bring a laptop with you everywhere you go. Nowadays, one device does everything. And the game has changed hugely.
How does it compare to, for example, JAWS, Supernova, the kind of traditional screen readers that run on desktop with software that you had to pay a lot of money for?
Strangely, it doesn't actually compare because they're not comparable. Because VoiceOver is built in and is native, they've done a lot of things behind the scenes to make it work out of the box in such a way that everything else can, if they want to, interface with it, as the first guy mentioned, who I again can't remember. I wish I could. Fabien. So he got it right. A lot of developers don't get it right. I've had a lot of run-ins with people like iRig, who make this great grand piano called iGrand, which if you heard it, you would not believe it was coming from a phone. And I contacted them about it, and they were not interested in making it accessible. And I was quite willing to pay the £13 it cost, but I'm not going to pay for an app that I cannot use. It's not going to happen.
Well, it sounds like there's a common theme tonight that to make a design a success, it has to be built with accessibility from the start. It doesn't just happen at the very end. So I was wondering, Abdi, what's your best digital experience ever?
Okay, my best. I think it was Google Docs. I think they're the best ones. Why? Because deaf people in meetings, if there's a lot of people in meetings, you don't have to concentrate on the sign language interpreting, you don't have to read facial expressions, you've got one document that has everything in it and people can contribute. And it doesn't matter where the deaf person is, where the interpreter is, they could be working from home. And people who have people who have BSL as their first language, all the different styles, they can all be put in, and then you can work out together which is the appropriate language for like a complaint letter or a grant application, all these different kind of things. And then, you could book an interpreter to work from home to do it. It means they don't have to come for 3 hours travel time included and come and work face to face. You can actually book them to work from home and make sure they work for cheaper as well. So it's you're saving money at an interpreter's expense, which is always a good thing. And then you can also, I want to talk about an important thing, a bad experience as well that I've had. I have to say this. It happened to me recently. I went to Margate and I was on the train and I was sat there on the train, and it said it's going to Margate, and a lot of people were all sat around me, obviously going to Margate as well, and I sat down on the train, and as you do, as the train carries on, I fell asleep. And then when I woke up, I noticed that I was the only person in the carriage. I was the only one there. And then the doors closed and I looked up and it said it's going back to Stratford. And I was like, oh fuck, what am I going to do now? I didn't know what to do, it's expensive. So I actually pulled the emergency button. I pulled that thing, I had to. I just pulled it and the train ground to a halt. And then the inspector or whoever it was came up and gone, are you okay, are you okay? And I said, well, what's happened? It says it's going back to Stratford. And he said, oh no, we're going to Margate. And I was like, well, look what it says up there. And he went, oh, sorry, it's a mistake. It was wrong. The reader was wrong. The digital reader was wrong. It is going to Margate. And it was very embarrassing for me, but I felt it was my right because I didn't get the correct information. And then if there's an app that I could use regularly for the train time, there's an app now that I can use regularly for train time. So before, when you didn't know, you were lost. Now everything's in there, and deaf people can feel they've got that accessibility. I mean, still some trains don't have that full accessibility, and you just get that voice message, and that's a bit disappointing, but things are improving. But that particular app was very useful to me.
Which app is this?
There's different apps really. There's ones for Newcastle have an app that I use. That's train times. I use that one. There's the tube times. There's lots of different ones really to give you those kind of information. There's quite a lot of choice. So some are cheap and some are free. They're fantastic. Before you'd have to look through a book or something. Or ask deaf friends if they knew, or you'd have to ask somebody, responsible, or maybe the notices weren't clear. But now with these apps, I get that full access that I needed.
Great, fantastic. How about you, Andre?
Apps that I like, or what's that?
Apps that you like. Best digital experience. It doesn't have to be an app. Maybe your washing machine is fantastic for some
I wish it was. I think one of the coolest experiences I ever had was I picked up an app to a TV guide actually. The initial TV guide from TV Guide Co UK was absolutely shit. I found another one on the App Store from tv24.co.uk which was not. And it was so good out of the box that I called Sweden and thanked the guy on a Saturday. I think I woke him up. He had never heard of VoiceOver at all, and he was completely blown away by the fact that his app just worked. Mm-hmm. And he stayed in touch ever since and said, did we mess up this build? Did we mess up this build? Check out these new features. And You know, it's great when you get something that is A, free, and B, that good from the get-go without trying. He didn't try, he just did what he had to do and it worked. You know, something like that is really a wonderful thing. But a bad experience, Barclays Ping It. The first time I got Barclays Ping It, there was a thing that came up on my phone screen, and with VoiceOver it said View 3. And that's it, that's the whole story. Basically, I turned off VoiceOver, I tapped blindly on the screen to see if I could bypass this stupid screen, and I did eventually. It took me about 15 minutes, I kid you not. There was no one else in the house, and I was then able to set it up. But you can guarantee I sent them a very scathing email. By the next build, it was fixed, and by the Barclays banking app that came out a few months later, none of those happened. But the video initially was unskippable with VoiceOver, and that was an absolute fail. Don't do it again.
Okay, so I think that just one more last question before we take questions from the floor and also from Twitter if we have any. How do we proactively reach out to you guys rather than you having a bad experience and us having to complain? A lot of the times there's the desire to make something, build something accessibly from the start, but it's very hard to find testers, to find people who want to look through your app or site. So how would we reach out, Andre?
I think one of the easiest ways to do it, and I'm not sure whether this applies to the deaf, I hope so, is if you search on Twitter for the hashtag A11Y. I'd like to assume that other disability people would use the same thing. Most of those times people that tweet with that tag either are disabled in some way or other or care about it enough to actually use the hashtag. So you could ask them on Twitter if they are, and if so, what the disability is, because I don't really see it as a personal question. If you want to know, you have to know. And if you don't ask, you'll never know. And if you are, can you please test this app or this app? We'll pay you lots of money.
What do you think, Abdi? About...
Well, really, I've been involved in a lot of useful testing groups myself and a lot of different things. I've been to the bank, I've been to different kind of organizations. Recently, I was involved in the Olympics and Visa. I've been testing for them, testing the card, different kinds of things, going into banks. I've been involved in a lot of testing things, and I've got a lot of experience in that. And also fixing things for disabled people. You have to give disabled people, you have to give them employment. You have to use them, it's like a job. You have to use disabled people and you give them the work as well, using their experience. I've got a degree, for example, and I can give that kind of feedback. You can question me, but I haven't got a job because I'm deaf. And there's a lot of opportunities for deaf people, but people aren't deaf aware, and that happens. So now it's about time really to get proactive and make companies more aware, like I'm doing with my charity, because deaf people have got skills, and it's up to you to use those. It's important. Use the different experiences from those different groups.
So would you say reaching out to charities like yours would be one strategy to find people?
Absolutely, reach out, because at the moment I'm involved in lots of different things. For example, the FA Football Association, I'm involved with them. I was involved with the Olympics and in deaf groups, and I want to get more disabled people involved in sports, also working with the police, like using our time to make a difference. And it benefits the deaf community and it benefits disabled people, but we've got to be really proactive. And I hope people out there, like designers or whatever, will help disabled people, and the help that you're doing, I hope it continues. Because we've got to try and get everyone involved, and especially involving disabled people more in the actual projects.
What's the name of your charity?
It's called Deaf Unity.
Fantastic, great. On this note, I'd like to
And sorry, my Deaf Unity charity isn't Big D or Small D. It's all deaf together.
Great, thanks, Abdi. So, do you guys have any questions? Kevin, in your first row.
I'd just like to add to what we've been talking about. Because of the internet and the outreach of social media, don't be afraid to type in, visually impaired charities, deaf charities, or whatever, and I'm sure you'd get tons of results of, and it would be very easy to contact charities, because there are so many now, and there are so many that are starting to reach out on social media. For example, I work for the Royal London Society for Blind People, and we have a lot of young people who are sort of trying out these new apps and so on. So in terms of contacting people, then that would be very easy to do. And I think the real crucial thing for designers is, like we said, that's been covered today, has been simplicity is really important. And also, like really caring. I was once on a forum because people were talking about Spotify to try and make it accessible. And I don't know who it was, but somebody wrote on Spotify, "Oh, why are you all blind people moaning about accessibility? You only make up 1% of the market." And that actually, quite hurt really, like globally. It's like, well, we're actually still a 1% that actually matter. And there's people with disabilities all over the place, and like Fabien said, people are getting older, they're going to make up half of the market, and that's only going to grow and grow and grow as the future is, as people get older and so on. So it's really important to not just think of it as something, oh, I don't have to worry about it myself because I don't need to, design something accessibly. You never know, like 2 days from now, a family member or a friend could need an app that, you've designed, and they'd be eternally grateful. So that's well, yeah.
Thanks, Gary. Another question here? What did you have?
Yes, actually I had a question for the blind people in this room. You said initially when you looked at the iPhone 3GS, you thought it was absolutely rubbish. And I think in the wider world there's still a bit of a misperception that anything touchscreen automatically means blind people can't use it.
That's the big B, small b thing.
Yeah. So how do you counter that, and B, how do you make sure that touchscreen devices are actually optimized for partially sighted or blind people?
That's a really good question. Kevin, you could help me with this. Initially, Apple didn't do that, and when they did do that, it was almost too late because Nokia still had at that time the market. But then the guy who made Talks unfortunately passed away, and then Apple did really step in and fill that niche. And now there's Android, and so there's a lot of choice out there. So it really is down to the people that make these devices. They have to be on the ball from the get-go, not just, today we feel like doing something new, let's try this. That's not good enough. Do it from the beginning, do it properly, do it now.
And it's also, never be afraid to be inventive. For example, the Apple iPhone, for example, came out and the keyboard is quite difficult to text with, and I don't know if any of you guys have heard of the app Flexi that's come out recently, which has just basically, some people call it a glorified predictive texting and whatever, but it basically is a very advanced predictive text engine. So I can tap my phone, and simulate where I think I know the letters are, for example, the word hello, and then it replaces it with the word, and it gives you suggestions. Now that speeds up typing by an immense amount, and again, it's just people being inventive and using the technology that Apple themselves gave. So that's always really important.
Next question.
Yeah, first, just thank our panelists for coming. It's been really interesting. But both of you, I'm guessing, are old enough to have had a childhood where there wasn't a lot of these assistive technologies, and you've then adopted them later. How different do you think it is for children growing up now, where these devices are available to them kind of from the beginning?
Abby, do you want to start?
Well, like for children now, before when I was a deaf child, for myself there was absolutely no access whatsoever to sign language. I didn't understand English, I couldn't read, there was nothing really for me. There was no plain English, nothing like that. I had to use simple icons, I didn't understand what people were saying, I had a very confusing time. Now, at the moment, because I'm involved with ITV translation, I'm involved with translating books into sign language for children. And that means that young deaf children, through their iPad, can access a book that's being signed to them. They can actually get it in sign language, and it also has voice. So that means it benefits deaf children, and hearing children can listen to it and watch it. And then through this ITV app, you can change the colours as well. And so you can just bring this, and by introducing this, it's really improved accessibility. I mean, it's kind of basic at the moment, and it's kind of linked to the web. And it's a talking room. Like before, there was just like simple things like email or whatever that was very basic, and now that's really developed. And now you've got like cameras, for example, where you can be communicating to people all over the world. So I think for young people, the improvements have been enormous.
How about young blind children?
Oh wow! I remember the first phone I got was this disgusting Motorola thing, which I used to just, at the time, you used to be able to ring free phone 0800 numbers. That's about all I did with it at age 14, 15. That's all we could do. It didn't text. And the phone that I got later could, but I couldn't read them. So people would text me, my cousins who could all see, and I would have to have someone else read them back to me. Until, that is, as I said, I got this infrared dongle and Nokia PC Suite, the early versions that used to crash on command. And texting back with that was a wonderful joke. But it did allow me to be more independent. You know, it's funny, you go from such nothing to wowing every day when you wake up because I can do this or that or the other. And it's an amazing, wonderful feeling. And I wake up some days, even now, despite having had a phone and a computer that talks for years, and I just stop and look at my wife and say, you know what, I can do what you do. And I love that feeling so much.
Great. Any more questions? Yes.
So we've spoken a lot about how empowering some of the new technologies are and then what a change they have made. Do any circumstances or scenarios or problems that you face in your lives, do any spring to mind whereby an app or a software solution could really meet an unmet need for you?
Often.
Is there a missing need or a missing app for an existing need?
I would love a standard that works for the majority of household gadgets, whereby they can all be Wi-Fi compliant. No, I'm serious though. Washing machines, ovens, you name it. Because whenever you get a new device, it's a massive learning curve because I can't read the manual. And PDFs sometimes say press the, and then this works. Because a lot of it's true. When you convert PDF to text, a lot of the content does go missing. It does. It's bad.
Abdi, how about you?
Okay, well, deaf people, when they meet hearing people, for example, most, when you have an interpreter or you can't use the phone or you want to go to the police station, it's really important in the UK. And in America, they're really advanced in this. You can just phone an interpreter, a relay interpreter, straight away, and you can just book them to come or phone the police through this interpreter. In the UK, they're behind on this technology of just phoning straight through to an interpreter. You can, most deaf people can't access this, and they have to use ATW. Oh, Access to Work, sorry, that's my mistake. Interpreters have to use a government scheme called Access to Work, which causes delays and is bureaucratic, and they have to use this and it's expensive. Now in America, they have lots of competition, whereas here in the UK, we're behind. We're still kind of like booking an interpreter, waiting for their availability. In America, an interpreter can be sat at home and you've got this app, you've got your iPad, you can just phone straight through. The other hearing person can look on their computer screen. But the UK is slow in catching up with that technology.
Great. Thank you. Was there a question over there?
Yeah, so a lot of the discussions around accessibility are always about limitations, but I have a feeling, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but that the playing field is leveling a little bit, because on one hand, the technology for accessibility support is getting better, but on the other hand, screens, like we're doing more on mobile phones with smaller screens, so actually, yeah, for people who do rely on vision, it's getting more difficult perhaps to use, and I'm wondering are there already things that you can do better than someone who uses, do you have examples of that?
Oh yes. Well, I gave my wife an iPad. I had a Bluetooth keyboard paired to the iPad, and Fabien mentioned earlier that you could use joysticks and keyboards with iPads. So I hit the home button 3 times, voiceover comes on, scares the shit out of me. But I was able to actually text her from the bathroom. The phone was on my desk, the keyboard was not. I was using a set of wireless headphones, and you can't actually use the keyboard, you can't use the whole OS without voiceover in iOS at all. I don't know why, that's a silly limitation. I think the arrow key should work with or without speech on. But stuff like that, that was a prank idea, but the fact of the matter is, you could have my phone in your hand right now, and I could still use it. That stuff is cool.
Well, recently, talking about accessibility, I couldn't access my friend because they were really far away. They were in Qatar. And there was a meeting there and I couldn't get there. And I used my iPad and Skype, we used Skype, and I was just sitting here with my other friends, and then we were reading what they were talking about as well, and that was very useful. You could just read it. It had subtitle and text. You didn't need a sign language interpreter, and then later you could save all this, and then you could get somebody to either translate different English or use a sign language interpreter to clarify points. That was really useful. But my big concern really with technology improving, that's fantastic, it really is a big help, and there's lots of things, but I'm worried about all this hands-free thing, because I'm deaf. I'm certainly not a hands-free person. I'm a person who uses my hands, and so it's really difficult with deaf people, because I am using my hands to communicate, and so much hands-free is a bit scary for me.
Caleb, how are we doing for time?
I think we're done.
Okay. Great. Have you had any questions on Twitter though?
Do you have any questions on Twitter?
Sorry. None that I have.
Okay, maybe we can take one more.
Yeah.
Hi, so my question is about gaming, so I'm sure there'll be some people in the room who've worked on games before. Also kind of a bit of response to the story about the piano app, and also the comments about being 1% of the market. The thing is, if you're actually designing for niche audiences, the design for people who've got less products available to them, the amount of traffic you get is actually much higher than you expect. So I literally, like 20 minutes ago, got sent through some stats on an iOS game. And it's really trivial, just one line of code will let you find out whether or not people are using VoiceOver. And they very quickly and cheaply made their game VoiceOver accessible, and 10% of their traffic is coming from VoiceOver users. So that aside there, that's kind of my question, is if you've had much experience with VoiceOver gaming, if you've noticed the situation improving.
VoiceOver gaming?
Well, I was actually at the offices of something else recently. They're the guys behind Papa Sangre and the Nightjar, which are all interactive games that you play entirely with headphones. Unfortunately, not very deaf-centric. I didn't make it, don't shoot me. But they invited me down to test the new engine out, which entirely bypasses VoiceOver, uses something called Direct Touch. I'm sure app developers know of that. It's essentially what GarageBand on Apple uses and the core IK Oscillator app. So it means that you don't need to disable VoiceOver to use gestures and touching the screen in the game, because or in your app, sorry. You used to have to turn off VoiceOver to do that, and that's fine, as long as you know which part of the screen you have to touch. So stuff like that is becoming it's becoming a lot more prevalent, yes. Kevin, I'm sure you can agree or disagree with that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you know, games are becoming a little bit more accessible, and I think the keys just like, because you know, it's a new ground. For example, the Nightjar, Papa Sangre are interactive games, but maybe in the future more multi-touch gestures can begin to be introduced into gaming as well.
Yeah.
And I also think it's very important that people really use, for example, some of these games are sort of very marketed as blind, and you know, it's sort of oh my god, they use the fear element of blindness rather than actually making the dark something quite useful. Like, for example, I don't know, you could be a soldier that's parachuted into some dark area and you're genuinely like completely lost, and you have to use your senses rather than saying, oh, you know, you're blind and you have to find your way out. You know, there's just, I think the concept has to grow, and there's a big market for that for game developers as well.
Great, thank you very much. Andrew, do you have another quick comment?
Alistair, you mentioned the Olympics a while back. On the wonderfully 42-inch TV that we got as a moving-in present, I was able to use an app called Text Detective, which is an OCR app. And I'm telling you, this is the best 69 pence I've ever spent in my whole life. I could point it at the TV screen on one of those blank channels when that loop of music was playing that the BBC must have commissioned from some God knows where, and read the timetables using my phone. That was kick-ass. All right, that is the way of the future. And being able to read bits of random paper that you might leave around, parcels that aren't for me, don't open other people's mail, reading the little cellophane windows. So apps are just amazing, and the iPhone itself, with its apps, has been a lifesaver in some situations.
Yeah, definitely. There's I lived in Birmingham for 4 years, and the buses don't talk like they do in London. And there was often the time when I had to go home, and there were many times that the driver forgot to tell me to get off, so I'd end up in some random place and try and cross a road that I didn't really know. And when Ariadne GPS came out, which Fabien mentioned at the beginning, I could actually use that app because it would tell me what road I was going on, and it just made my whole journey home experience far less stressful. And that was something that really I used every single day, and it really changed my life.
That is one of the scariest things ever. I once got in a cab, went to West London, except not. I ended up in Hackney. Hello? And he had to, bring me back across town at no extra cost to me, but that's frightening. It genuinely is, because you don't know where you'll end up or what you'll be.
Guys, thank you very much. Don't forget you can chat to Abdi and Andre and also Kevin on Twitter if you have any more questions, and you can follow the A11Y, which is accessibility shortened, Twitter hashtag.
So thank you very much, Veronika, for facilitating. Thank you very much, Abdi. Thank you very much, Andre and Kevin, for presenting today. And that's all. Thank you very much for coming today. Again, special thanks to Nomensa, Sapien Nitro, and everyone here to make this event a memorable one. Thank you very much, guys.